Sister wants to walk down the aisle at my wedding. We used that to our advantage. I'm writing this from my honeymoon, and I have to admit, part of me is still on a high from what we pulled off. I never expected my wedding day to turn into a battle for emotional justice, but here we are. It feels amazing to finally share this with you all. My husband, who's sitting right next to me, is more excited about me posting this than our actual honeymoon. He's been begging me to tell this story, and he's practically jumping in his seat while I type it. He says it's a way to get even with the family that wronged me. So, since he's been so supportive and this is a throwaway account, I'm letting him be involved, but I'm taking the reins here with the story. It's a cathartic release after everything that's gone down. Just a quick disclaimer, I don't give permission for this to be reposted anywhere. This stays here. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for the full ride because it's long, dramatic, and packed with revenge. So grab some popcorn, this is going to take a minute. I don't think I ever stood a chance. From the moment I was born, it felt like my role in my family was to be the backdrop to my sister's spotlight. The sad part? I don't think my parents ever realized how blatantly they treated me like second best. It wasn't just that they loved my sister more, it was as if she was the chosen one, and I was a mere accessory to their perfect little family. I'd always hoped things would change, but as I got older, it only became clearer. My sister had everything they wanted, and I had to fight for every bit of attention I could get. The most subtle forms of favoritism were the worst. Every birthday, every event, everything I was supposed to be celebrated for was always focused on her. My sister's cake flavor was always the one picked, even though I had to swallow my own distaste for it every year. Whenever I wanted something, I was told that it was too much or unnecessary. I can still remember the sting of being handed smaller presents than hers, even on my own birthday. I would sit there, biting my tongue, hoping my parents would acknowledge the hurt, but instead, they'd brag about how lucky I was to have a sister like her. I didn't feel lucky. I felt invisible. It didn't end there. Whenever I tried to express myself or speak up about how unfair things were, I was shot down. If I had a problem, they either dismissed it or blamed me for causing trouble. But if my sister had a problem? Oh, it was a crisis. They'd listen to her with open arms, comforting her, finding ways to solve her problems, no matter how petty. Meanwhile, I was stuck feeling like the world's biggest disappointment. It was exhausting. And as I grew older, I found myself slipping into the background, silently wishing they would see me for once, just once, as more than just the second option. Then came the teenage years, where everything seemed to fall apart. My sister, who had once been somewhat indifferent toward me, suddenly took a sharp turn. She was no longer just competing with me for attention, she was now actively trying to ruin my life. She'd accuse me of things I didn't do, mess with my friends, and stir drama whenever she could. And somehow, my parents always believed her. She would paint me as the villain, and they bought it without hesitation. If I ever tried to defend myself, they'd tell me to stop causing trouble or overreacting. I could feel my frustration building, but no matter how much I tried to stand up for myself, I was always on the losing side. It was like fighting a battle where the rules were rigged from the start. The worst came when I got my first boyfriend. I was excited. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. When my sister got wind of this, she immediately started flirting with him. It wasn't just teasing, this was full-on, inappropriate attention. She wore revealing clothes, batted her eyelashes, and tried to tell him how much better she could be for him. When he rejected her, she flipped the script and accused him of flirting with her. Guess who my parents sided with? Her, of course. Even though I knew the truth, they just couldn't see it. I was devastated. To this day, I don't think they ever realized how cruel that was. Things didn't get better. She started showing up at my other boyfriends' houses, trying to flirt with them. If they didn't give her attention, she would act as if I had stolen them from her. My parents never saw it as anything other than a small sibling rivalry. In their eyes, I was the overdramatic one, the one with issues, while she was just acting like a teenager. But I was starting to see the pattern. She could do whatever she wanted, while I had to constantly prove myself. And the more I tried to get them to understand, the more they pushed me away. It was high school when I realized that no matter how much I tried, nothing was ever going to change. I worked my ass off to get good grades, while my sister barely scraped by. But what did I get for my efforts? Nothing. She was constantly praised for mediocre work, while my achievements were brushed aside. When graduation time came, I knew my parents weren't going to help me with college. They had already promised my sister everything she needed, and I was left to fend for myself. They told me it was just part of growing up and that I should learn to take care of myself. Meanwhile, my sister's tuition was covered without hesitation, and she was given every advantage. So I did what I had to do. I worked my ass off, earned a scholarship, and planned my escape. But I made one mistake. I had underestimated my parents' ability to twist the knife. They dismissed my scholarship as luck, not even bothering to congratulate me. Instead, they made it clear that they were prioritizing my sister's education over mine. Even though my grades had been better, they wouldn't even acknowledge it. The worst part? They denied my ability to go to school on my own. They told me I wasn't responsible enough to handle the loans, as if they had any right to decide my future. But I wasn't going to let them hold me back anymore. I accepted the scholarship with a sense of quiet triumph. I didn't tell them anything. Instead, I posted it on social media as a way to tell them, I'm not waiting for your approval. I'm doing this on my own. Now, let's talk about the wedding. My husband and I were both clear about what we wanted, a simple, stress-free ceremony. We didn't care about a huge, extravagant wedding. We wanted a beautiful honeymoon, a small gathering of close friends, and some peace. But my parents? Well, they had other ideas. They insisted on meeting my fiancée, and while I was initially hesitant, I knew I had to introduce them at some point. What followed was nothing short of a disaster. When my husband finally met with my parents, they had one demand that shocked us both. My sister was going to walk down the aisle before me in a wedding dress. The reasoning? It's not fair for the younger sister to get married first. She deserves the experience. At first, I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. They were dead serious. My wedding was supposed to be about my sister, not me. The fact that they were willing to not only ruin my day, but force my sister into the spotlight was too much to bear. But my husband? He was ready. He didn't hesitate for a second. In that moment, he saw exactly what my parents were doing and decided we were going to turn the tables on them. We'll let them think they're pulling the strings, he said with a devilish grin. But we're going to make sure they pay for it. Let's see how far they'll go. I agreed, albeit a little uncertain at first. But as soon as I saw his determination, I knew we were going to get revenge, good revenge. From that moment, we started to play the game. My husband kept up the act, pretending to agree with my parents' ridiculous demands. Every time they made a suggestion, he'd nod along, even though I could see the look in his eyes. We're going to use this to our advantage. And we did. Every single decision my parents made for the wedding was turned on its head. We made them think they were making all the choices while we secretly pushed them into paying for the most expensive options. When it came to the venue, my husband played it cool. We'd meet with the wedding planner, go through the options, and pick the lowest or second lowest priced ones. Then, my husband would casually suggest to my sister that we could do better. It's a shame we're not using our full budget, he'd say, pretending to be disappointed. And of course, my sister would demand better. My parents, eager to please her, would step in and insist on covering the extra costs. It was like clockwork. But it didn't stop there. We played the same game with the photographer, the flowers, even the wedding dress. Every time my parents thought they were giving my sister the best, we made sure it worked in our favor. My husband would take my sister to the flower shop and suggest the flowers we didn't want, big, elaborate, over-the-top ones that screamed excess. Then he'd feign regret, saying how we couldn't afford them, but wouldn't it be nice if we could? My sister, of course, couldn't resist the temptation to demand that we get the most expensive ones. My parents, wanting to make sure she was happy, agreed to pay for them, all while thinking they were doing this for her. Little did they know, they were financing our dream wedding without even realizing it. The wedding dress was the biggest twist. My parents had a specific dress in mind for me, a hideous, dated gown that screamed family heirloom, but didn't quite match my style at all. We had planned to say yes to the dress, knowing full well we'd just buy another one on our own. But things got tricky when my mom insisted I wear it, even sending me a message about it. She wanted proof I'd agreed to it, and that text would be used against me if I ever tried to back out. So, we had to get clever. I sent a firm refusal, standing my ground and refusing to wear something that wasn't right for me. But here's the thing, we couldn't just let it end there. We needed to make sure my parents thought everything was going according to their plan. My husband, ever the actor, came to the rescue again. He told my parents he'd see what he could do about the dress. Meanwhile, my sister came up with a plan of her own to sabotage my dress, suggesting she could ruin it so I'd be forced to wear the one they wanted. She was that desperate for attention. But we were ahead of her. My husband played it all to perfection, leading my parents to believe he was with them. All the while, we were making sure everything else was in place for our secret revenge. Fast forward to the day of the wedding. We had our entire plan set, and I have to admit, I felt a rush of excitement knowing that my parents were walking straight into a trap they had no idea about. The plan was simple, make my parents believe they were pulling the strings while we had everything already set up, especially the crucial detail, security. We hired a top-tier security guard who was instructed not to let anyone, especially my sister, into the venue unless they were on the guest list. This was crucial because we knew my sister would try to pull something, and we couldn't risk her ruining the day. But the real fun began when my parents showed up. They had no idea what was in store for them. They thought they'd be able to dictate everything, and they were so confident that they were going to control the day. But once they arrived at the venue, everything changed. The security guard was in place, and my parents were immediately confused as to why they couldn't walk in without being questioned. When my sister showed up, trying to enter as the bride, she was stopped dead in her tracks. The security guard told her there was already a bride, and she needed to leave. My sister, of course, started throwing a tantrum. She couldn't understand why she wasn't getting the attention she thought she deserved. As for my dad, he tried to argue with the security, claiming he was a relative, but the guard stood firm. The scene quickly turned chaotic as my parents argued with the staff. I could only imagine how furious they must have been, realizing that their plans were falling apart in front of their eyes. The kicker? They couldn't do anything about it. They had no backup plan, and no one believed their version of events. My dad tried to escalate things by threatening to call the police, but the security guard kept calm, saying he was just doing his job. While this drama was unfolding, I was already getting ready for the ceremony. I was told that my parents were freaking out. But to be honest, it didn't faze me anymore. I had already made peace with the fact that my family would never change, and I wasn't going to let them ruin the happiest day of my life. I had the support of my husband and the rest of the guests, and I was about to make my entrance as the real bride, the bride. As I stepped into the aisle, I saw the look of shock on my dad's face. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He tried to glance behind me, no doubt hoping to see my sister coming in her wedding dress, but it was already too late. The plan was in motion, and he was powerless to stop it. Just as I was about to reach the altar, my phone rang, and I saw it was my sister calling. She was furious, as expected, and my dad, seeing the call, rushed off to take it, leaving me standing at the altar, alone in the spotlight. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I'd finally gotten my chance to have the ceremony I always dreamed of, without interference. But what really made this entire scenario sweet was that I knew what was happening behind the scenes. My friend, who was in on the plan, had already started asking loud questions. "What do you mean by it shouldn't be her?" she called out, trying to make sure as many people as possible heard my dad's own words. My mom, realizing the situation was getting out of control, started trying to diffuse the tension, but it was too late. The drama didn't end there. As I walked down the aisle toward my husband, the whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone could hear the commotion, and people were starting to figure out that something was seriously wrong. My sister was still causing a scene outside, trying to get in. But by then, my parents realized they were losing their audience. My dad was still on the phone with my sister, and my mom was beside herself trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Meanwhile, I reached my husband, who gave me a reassuring smile, despite the chaos surrounding us. He was enjoying every second of it. He leaned in and whispered, "We've won. This is our moment." And it truly was. As I stood beside him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. For once, my wedding day was about me. For once, I wasn't going to be overshadowed by my sister's drama or my parents' toxic favoritism. At the reception, things got even more dramatic. My sister and my parents were still fighting outside. My sister, of course, was throwing a tantrum, sitting on the ground crying, while my dad and mom tried to salvage their reputation. But no one was buying their story. The truth had already leaked out, and everyone knew exactly what they had tried to pull. My husband had already sent a message to our family group chat, explaining the situation and providing all the evidence we had, screenshots of my sister's rage-filled messages, threats from my parents, and everything else they had sent to us in the aftermath. He wanted them to see just how far they were willing to go to ruin my wedding. And when they tried to reach out to me afterward, it was too late. My husband had already sent everything to my relatives, and no one believed them anymore. My parents and sister were left to stew in their own humiliation. They couldn't turn the narrative around this time. The public shame they had so readily tried to heap onto me had come full circle. And my wedding? Well, it became a celebration of triumph, a triumph of love, independence, and justice. The emotional weight I carried for so many years had finally been lifted, and I was free to live my life on my own terms. Since then, my parents and sister have tried reaching out, but I've refused to engage. My husband has made it clear that we are keeping a paper trail to protect ourselves from their manipulations. And as for my sister, her messages were insane. She tried to blame me for everything that happened and accused me of orchestrating the entire thing to humiliate her. She even went so far as to accuse my husband of being involved with her. My husband, in his signature style, screenshot everything, sent it to the family group chat, and left them with no way to explain their behavior. We haven't heard from them since. It feels like the calm after the storm, and for once, I can breathe easy. We won, and the best part? They'll never, ever live this down. TLDR, my parents tried to make my sister walk down the aisle before me at my wedding. My husband and I decided to let them think we were going along with it while we secretly manipulated them into paying for the most extravagant parts of the wedding. When the day came, we hired security to stop my sister from entering. The plan worked, and they were left humiliated while I had the wedding of my dreams. Now, my family is trying to cover up their shame, but no one believes them anymore.